Hey, this is Doug picking up Under Milkwood on page 15 with first voice at the bottom. Now, in her iceberg white, holily laundered crinoline nightgown, under virtuous puller sheets, in her spruced and scoured, dust-defying bedroom in trig and trim Bayview, a house for paying guests at the top of the town, Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard, widow twice of Mr. Ogmore, linoleum, retired, and Mr. Pritchard, failed bookmaker, who, maddened by besuming, swabbing, and scrubbing, the voice of the vacuum cleaner and the fume of polish, ironically swallowed disinfectant, fidgets in her rent sleep, wakes in a dream, and nudges in the ribs dead Mr. Ogmore, dead Mr. Pritchard, ghostly on either side. Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard. Mr. Ogmore, Mr. Pritchard, it's time to inhale your balsam. Mr. Ogmore. Oh, Mrs. Ogmore. Mr. Pritchard. Oh, Mrs. Pritchard. Mrs. Pritchard. Soon it will be time to get up. Tell me your task in order. Mr. Ogmore. I must put my pajamas in the drawer marked pajamas. Mr. Pritchard. I must take my cold bath, which is good for me. Mr. Ogmore. I must wear my flannel band to ward off sciatica. Mr. Pritchard. I must dress behind the curtain and put on my apron. Mr. Ogmore. I must blow my nose. Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard. In the garden, if you please. Mr. Ogmore. In a piece of tissue paper which I afterwards burn. Mr. Pritchard. I must take my salts, which are nature's friend. Mr. Ogmore. I must boil the drinking water because of germs. Mr. Pritchard. I must take my herb tea, which is free from tannin. Mr. Ogmore. And have charcoal biscuit, which is good for me. Mr. Pritchard. I may smoke one pipe of asthma mixture. Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard. In the woodshed, if you please. Mr. Pritchard. And dust the parlor and spray the canary. Mr. Ogmore. I must put on rubber gloves and search the peak for fleas. Mr. Pritchard. I must dust the blinds and then I must raise them. Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard. And before you let the sun in, mind it wipes its shoes. First voice. In Butcher Bynan's, Gossamer Bynan, daughter, school teacher, dreaming deep, daintily ferrets under a fluttering hummock of chicken feathers in a slaughterhouse that has chintz curtains and three-piece suite, and finds, with no surprise, a small, rough, ready man with a bushy tail, winking in a paper carrier. Gossamer Bynan. At last, my love. First voice. Sighs Gossamer Bynan, and the bushy tail wags rude and ginger. Horgan Morgan. Help! Second voice. Cries Organ Morgan, the organist, in his dreams. Organ Morgan. There is perturbation and music in Coronation Street. All the spouses are honking like geese, and the baby singing opera. P.C. Attilly Reese has got his truncheon out and is playing condensers by the pump. The cows from Sunday Meadow ring like reindeer, and on the roof of Hondelvia see the women's welfare hoofing bloomed in the moon. First voice. At the sea end of town, Mr. and Mrs. Floyd, the Cocklers, are sleeping as quiet as death, side by wrinkled side, toothless, salt and brown, like two old kippers in a box. And high above in Salt Lake Farm, Mr. Uta Watkins counts all night the wife-faced sheep as they leap the fences on the hill, smiling and knitting and bleating just like Mrs. Uta Watkins. Uta Watkins, yawning. 84, 85, 36, 48, 89. Mrs. Uta Watkins. Knit one, slip one. Knit two together. Pass the slip stitch over. First voice. Ocky Milkman, drowned asleep in Cockle Street, is emptying his churns into the doughy river. Ocky Milkman. Regardless of expense. First voice. And weeping like a funeral. Second voice. Cherry Owen, next door, lifts a tankard to his lips, but nothing flows out of it. He shakes the tankard, turns into a fish. He drinks the fish. First voice. P.C. Artillery slumps out of bed, dead to the dark and still foghorning, and drags out his helmet from under the bed, but deep in the backyard lock-up of his sleep, a mean voice murmurs. A voice murmuring, "You'll be sorry for this in the morning." First voice, and he heaves ho back to bed. His helmet swashes in the dark. Second voice, willy-nilly, postman, Sleep Up Street, walks 14 miles to deliver the post as he does every day of the night, and rat-a-tats hard and sharp on Mrs. Willy-nilly. Mrs. Willy-nilly, "Don't spank me, please, teacher." Second voice, whimpers his wife at his side, but every night of her married life she has been late for school. First voice, Sinbad Sailors, over the tap room with the sailor's arms, hugs his damp pillow, whose secret name is Gossamer Bynum. A mogul catches Lily Smalls in the washhouse. Lily Smalls, "Oh, you old mogul." Second voice, Mrs. Rose Cottage's eldest, May, peels off her pink and white skin in a furnace, in a tower, in a cave, in a waterfall, in a wood, and waits there, raw as an onion, for Mr. Right to leap up the burning tall hollow splashes of leaves like a brilliantine trout. May Rose Cottage, "Call me Dolores, like they do in the movies." First voice, alone until she dies, Bessie Bighead, hired help, born in the workhouse, smelling of the cowshed, snores bass and gruff on a couch of straw in a loft in Salt Lake Farm, and picks a posy of daisies in Sunday Meadow to put on the grave of Gomer Owen, who kissed her once by the pigsty when she wasn't looking, and never kissed her again, although she was looking all the time. And the inspectors of cruelty fly down into Mrs. Butcher Bynum's dream to persecute Mr. Bynum for selling. Butcher Bynum, "Owl meat, dog's eyes, munchop." Second voice, Mr. Bynum, Butcher's bloodied apron, spring heels down Coronation Street, a finger, not his own, in his mouth. Straight-faced in his cunning sleep, he pulls the legs of his dreams, and Butcher Bynum, hunting on pig back, shoots down the wild giblets. Organ Morgan, "Help!" Gossamer Bynum, "My foxy darling." First voice, now behind the eyes and secrets of the dreamers in the streets rocked to sleep by the sea. See thee. Second voice, titbits and topsy-turvies, bobs and button-tops, bags and bones, ash and rind and dandruff and nail-parings, saliva and snowflakes, and molted feathers of dreams, the wrecks and sprats and shells and fish bones, whale juice and moonshine and small salt fry dished up by the hidden sea. First voice, the owls are hunting. Look, over Bethesda gravestones one hoots and swoops and catches a mouse by Honoris' beloved wife. And in Coronation Street, which you alone can see, it is so dark under the chapel in the skies, the Reverend Eli Jenkins, poet, preacher, turns in his deep towards dawn sleep and dreams of Reverend Eli Jenkins. Estevado. Second voice, he intricately rhymes to the music of Crith and Pidgorn all night long in his druid's seedy nighty in a beer tent black with parches. First voice, Mr. Pugh, schoolmaster, fathoms asleep, pretends to be sleeping, spies foxy round the droop of his nightcap, and psst, whistles up. Mr. Pugh, "Murder." First voice, Mrs. Organ Morgan, groceress, coiled grey like a dormouse, her paws to her ears, conjures Mrs. Organ Morgan, "Silence." Second voice, she sleeps very dulcet in a cove of wool, and trumpeting Organ Morgan at her side snores no louder than a spider. First voice, Mary Ann Sailors dreams of Mary Ann Sailors, the Garden of Eden. First voice, she comes in a smock frock and clogs. Mary Ann Sailors, away from the cool, scrubbed, cobbled kitchen with the Sunday school pictures on the whitewashed wall, and the farmer's almanac hung above the settle and the sides of bacon on the ceiling hooks, and goes down the cockle-shelled paths, that apple-pie kitchen garden, ducking under the gippo's clothes pegs, catching her apron on the black currant bushes, past bean rows and onion bed and tomatoes ripening on the wall, towards the old man playing the harmonium in the orchard, and sits down on the grass at his side, and shells the green peas that grow up through the lap of her frock that brushes the dew. First voice, in Donkey Street, so furred with sleep, dye bread, Polygata, no good boyo, and Lord Cutglass sigh before the dawn that is about to be, and dream of thy bread. Harems, Polygata, babies, no good boyo, nothing. Lord Cutglass, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. First voice, time passes. Listen, time passes. An owl flies home past Bethesda to a chapel in an oak, and the dawn inches up. Cuckoo. First voice, stand on this hill. This is Aragab Hill, old as the hills, high, cool, and green, and from the small circle of stones, made not by Druids, but by Mrs. Bynon's Billy, you can see all the town below you sleeping in the first of the dawn. You can hear the lovesick wood pigeons mooning in bed. A dog barks in his sleep farmyards away. The town ripples like a lake in the waking haze. Voice of a guidebook. Less than 500 souls inhabit the 3 quaint streets and the few narrow by-lanes and scattered farmsteads that constitutes this small, decaying watering place, which may indeed be called a backwater of life, without disrespect to its natives, who possess to this day a salty individuality of their own. The main street, Coronation Street, consists for the most part of humble 2-storied houses, many of which attempt to achieve some measure of gaiety by prinking themselves out in crude colors and by the liberal use of pinkwash, though there are remaining a few 18th century houses of more pretension, if on the whole in a sad state of disrepair. Though there is little to attract the hill climber, the health seeker, the sportsman, or the week-ending motorist, the contemplative may, if sufficiently attracted to spare it some leisurely hours, find in its cobbled streets, in its little fishing harbor, in its several curious customs, and in the conversation of its local characters, some of that picturesque sense of the past so frequently lacking in towns and villages which have kept more abreast of the times. The river Doe is said to abound in trout, but is much poached. The one place of worship, with its neglected graveyard, is of no architectural interest. The cock crows. Cuckoo! First voice. The principality of the sky lightens now over our green hill into spring morning, locked and crowed and belling. Bell rings. Ding. First voice. Who pulls the town hall bell rope but blind Captain Cat? One by one, the sleepers are wrung out of sleep this one morning as every morning. And soon you shall see the chimney slow up flying snow as Captain Cat, in his sailor's cap and sea boots, announces today with his loud get-out-of-bed bell. Second voice, the Reverend Eli Jenkins, in Bethesda House, gropes out of bed into his preacher's black, combs back his bard's white hair, forgets to wash, pads barefoot downstairs, opens the front door, stands in the doorway, and looking out at the day and up at the eternal hill, and hearing the sea break and the gab of birds, remembers his own verses and tells them softly to empty Coronation Street that is rising and raising its blinds. Reverend Eli Jenkins. Dear Gwalior, I know there are towns lovelier than ours, and fairer hills, and loftier far, and groves more full of flowers, and boskier woods more blithe with spring, and bright with birds adorning, and sweeter bards than I to sing their praise this beauteous morning. By Cader Idris, tempest torn, or Melhewiddafa's glory, Coned, Llewellyn, beauty born, Plinlimmon, old in story, by mountains where King Arthur dreams, in Premunifar defiant, Aragab Hill, a molehill seems a pygmy to a giant. By Sodaway, Sinny, Dovi, Dee, Edwa, Eden, Eled Hall, Taff and Towie broad and free, Lifnant with its waterfall, Clairwyn, Cledo, Dule, Dor, Eli, Gwilly, Ogar, Ned, small as our river Doe, Lord, a baby on a rushy bed. By Karen Sinan, king of time, our heron head is only a bit of stone with seaweed spread, where gulls come to be lonely. A tiny dingle is milkwood, by golden groves neath Grongar. But let me choose, and oh, I should love all my life and longer to stroll among our trees and stray in Goosegog Lane on Donkey Down, and hear the dowie sing all day, and never, never leave the town. Second voice. The Reverend Jenkins closes the front door. His morning service is over. First voice. Now, woken at last by the out-of-bed sleepy-head Polly put the kettle on town hall bell, Lily Smalls, Mrs. Bynum's treasure, comes downstairs from a dream of royalty, who all night long went larking with her full of sauce in the milkwood dark, and puts the kettle on the Primus ring in Mrs. Bynum's kitchen, and looks at herself in Mr. Bynum's shaving glass over the sink, and sees Lily Smalls. Oh, there's a face. Where you get that hair from? Got it from an old tomcat. Give it back then, love. Oh, there's a perm. Where'd you get that nose from, Lily? Got it from my father, silly. You've got it on upside down. Oh, there's a conk. Look at your complexion. Oh, no, you look. Needs a bit of makeup. Needs a veil. Oh, there's glamour. Where you get that smile, Lil? Never you mind, girl. Nobody loves you. That's what you think. Who is it loves you? Shan't tell. Come on, Lily. Cross your heart, then. Cross my heart. First voice, and very softly, her lips almost touching her reflection, she breathes the name and clouds the shaving glass. Mrs. Bynum. Lily! Lily Smalls. Yes, Mum. Mrs. Bynum. Where's my tea, girl? Lily Smalls. Where'd you think? In the cat box? Coming up, Mum. First voice. Mr. Pugh, in the schoolhouse opposite, takes up the morning tea to Mrs. Pugh, and whispers on the stairs. Mr. Pugh. Here's your arsenic, dear, and your weed killer biscuit. I've throttled your parakeet. I've spat in the vases. I've put cheese in the mouse holes. Here's your door creaks open. Nice tea, dear. Mrs. Pugh. Too much sugar. Mr. Pugh. You haven't tasted it yet, dear. Mrs. Pugh. Too much milk, then. Has Mr. Jenkins said his poetry? Yes, dear. Mrs. Pugh. Then it's time to get up. Give me my glasses. No, not my reading glasses. I want to look out. I want to see. Second voice. Lily Smalls, the treasurer, down on her red knees, washing the front step. Mrs. Pugh. She's tucked her dress in her bloomers. Oh, the baggage. Second voice. P.C. Artilleries, ox broad, barge booted, stamping out of handcuff house, and a heavy beef red huff, black browed under his damp helmet. Mrs. Pugh. He's going to arrest Polly Garter. Mark my words. Mr. Pugh. What for, dear? Mrs. Pugh. For having babies. Second voice. And lumbering down towards the Strand to see that the sea is still there. First voice. Marianne Sellers, opening her bedroom window above the tap room and calling out to the heavens. Marianne Sellers. I'm 85 years, 3 months, and a day. Mrs. Pugh. I will say this for her. She never makes a mistake. First voice. Organ Morgan at his bedroom window, playing chords on the sill to the morning fishwife gulls who, heckling over Donkey Street, observe, Dye bread. Me, dye bread, hurrying to the bakery, pushing in my shirt tails, buttoning my waistcoat. Ping goes a button. Why can't they sew them? No time for breakfast. Nothing for breakfast, says Wisewea. Mrs. Dye bread 1. Me, Mrs. Dye bread 1. Captain Shold in no old corset. Nice to be comfy. Nice to be nice. Clogging on the cobbles to stir up a neighbor. Oh, Mrs. Sarah, can you spare a loaf, love? Dye bread forgot the bread. There's a lovely morning. How's your boils this morning? Isn't that good news now? It's a change to sit down. Ta, Mrs. Sarah. Mrs. Dye bread 2. Me, Mrs. Dye bread 2. Gypsy to kill in a silky scarlet petticoat above my knees. Dirty, pretty knees. See my body through my petticoat, brown as a berry, high-heeled shoes with one heel missing, tortoise-shell comb in my bright black slinky hair, nothing else at all but a dab of scent, lolling gaudy at the doorway. Tell your fortune in the tea leaves, scowling at the sunshine, lighting up my pipe. Lord Cutglass. Me, Lord Cutglass, in an old frock coat, belonged to Eli Jenkins, and a pair of postman's trousers from Bethesda Jumble, running out of doors to empty slops, mind they're over, and then running in again. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Boyle. Me, no good Boyle, up to no good in the wash-house. Miss Price. Me, Miss Price, in my pretty print house coat, deft at the clothesline, natty as a jenny wren, then pat back to my egg in its cozy, my crisp toast fingers, my homemade plum and butter pat. Polygata. Me, Polygata, under the washing line, giving the breast in the garden to my bonny new baby. Nothing grows in our garden, only washing and babies. And where's their fathers live, my love? Over the hills and far away. You're looking up at me now? I know what you're thinking. You poor little milky creature. You're thinking, you're no better than you should be, Polly. And that's good enough for me. Oh, isn't life a terrible thing? Thank God. First voice. Now, frying pan spit, kettles and cats purr in the kitchen. The town smells of seaweed and breakfast all the way down from Bayview, where Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard, in smock and turban, big bazoon to engage the dust, picks at a starchless bread and sips lemon rind tea to Bottom Cottage, where Mr. Waldo, in bowler and bib, gobbles his bubble and squeak and kippers and swigs from the sauce bottle. Marianne Sailors. Praises the Lord who made porridge. First voice. Mr. Pugh. Remembers ground glass as he juggles his omelet. First voice. Mrs. Pugh. Nags the salt cellar. First voice. Willy-nilly postman. Willy-nilly. Downs his last bucket of black brackish tea and rumbles out bandy to the clucking back, where the hens switch and grieve for their tea-soaked sops. First voice. Mrs. Willy-nilly. Full of tea to her double-chinned brim, broods and bubbles over her coven of kettles on hissing hot range, always ready to steam open the mail. First voice. The Reverend Eli Jenkins finds a rhyme and dips his pen in his cocoa. First voice. Lord Cutglass in his ticking kitchen. Lord Cutglass. Scampers from clock to clock, a bunch of clock keys in one hand and fish head in the other. First voice. Captain Cat in his galley. Captain Cat. Blind and fine-fingered, save as his sea fry. First voice. Mr. and Mrs. Cherry Owen, in their Donkey Street room that is bedroom, parlor, kitchen, and scullery, sit down to last night's supper of onions boiled in their overcoats and broth of spuds and bacon rind and leeks and bones. Mrs. Cherry Owen. See that smudge on the wall by the picture of Auntie Blossom? That's where you threw the sago. Cherry Owen laughs with delight. And Mrs. Cherry Owen. You only miss me by an inch. Cherry Owen. I always miss Auntie Blossom, too. Mrs. Cherry Owen. Remember last night? In you reeled, my boy, as drunk as a deacon with a big wet bucket and a fish frail full of stout, and you looked at me and you said, God has come home, you said. And then over the bucket you went sprawling and bowling, and the floor was all flagons and eels. Cherry Owen. Was I wounded? Mrs. Cherry Owen. And then you took off your trousers and you said, does anybody want to fight? Oh, you old baboon. Cherry Owen. Give me a kiss. Mrs. Cherry Owen. And then you sang Bread of Heaven, tenor and bass. Cherry Owen. I always sing Bread of Heaven. Mrs. Cherry Owen. And then you did a little dance on the table. Cherry Owen. I did? Mrs. Cherry Owen. Drop dead. Cherry Owen. And then what did I do? Mrs. Cherry Owen. Then you cried like a baby and said you were a poor drunk orphan with nowhere to go but the grave. Cherry Owen. What did I do next, my dear? Mrs. Cherry Owen. Then you danced on the table all over again and said you were King Solomon Owen, and I was your Mrs. Sheba. Cherry Owen. And then? Mrs. Cherry Owen. Then I got you into bed, and you snored all night like a brewery. They laughed together. First voice. From Bynum Butcher's in Coronation Street, the smell of fried liver sidles out with onions on its breath. And listen, in the dark breakfast room behind the shop, Mr. and Mrs. Bynum, waited upon by their treasure, enjoy between bites their every morning hullabaloo, and Mrs. Bynum slips the grisly bits under the tasseled tablecloth to feed her cats. Meow. Mrs. Bynum. She likes the liver, Ben. Mr. Bynum. She ought to do, Bess. It's her brother's. Mrs. Bynum. Oh, do you hear that, Lily? Lily Smalls. Yes, Mum. Mrs. Bynum. We're eating pusscat. Lily Smalls. Yes, Mum. Mrs. Bynum. Oh, you cat butcher. Mr. Bynum. I was doctored, mine. It was doctored, mine. Mrs. Bynum. What's that got to do with it? Mr. Bynum. Yesterday we had a mole. Mrs. Bynum. Oh, Lily. Mr. Bynum. Monday, otter. Tuesday, shrews. Mrs. Bynum screams, ah! Lily Smalls. Go on, Mr. Bynum. He's the biggest liar in town. Mrs. Bynum. Don't you dare say that about Mr. Bynum. Lily Smalls. Everybody knows it, Mom. Mrs. Bynum. Mr. Bynum never tells a lie. Do you, Ben? Mr. Bynum. No, Bess. And now I am going out after the corgis with my little cleaver. Mrs. Bynum. Oh, Lily, ooh. First voice. Up the street in the Sailor's Arms, Sinbad Sailors, grandson of Marianne Sailors, draws a pint in the sunlit bar. The ship's clock in the bar says 11:30. 11:30 is opening time. The hands of the clock have stayed still at 11:30 for 50 years. It is always opening time in the Sailor's Arms, but it is closing time here. We're going to stop on page 41 and pick it up next time. And I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy doing this, and it's a wonderful acting exercise, and I love to use my voice, and there you go. So I hope to see you next time, and thank you.